Thanks, Eric, and thanks very much for the invitation. And thank you all for being here today and to taking the story on Northern Shield Resources and our subsidiary, Seabourne. I will be making forward-looking statements throughout the presentation, so I bring your attention to this advisory. So as many of you will know, Northern Shield is actually better known as a nickel-copper PG explorer, but this presentation is really going to focus on the Shot Rock gold property in Nova Scotia, which is being operated through Seabourne, which I say is our wholly owned subsidiary. And that allows Northern Shield to continue to focus on nickel-copper PG and magmatic stories, but allows us to take advantage of opportunities like this in other commodities. But we're basically exporting our same model-driven approach that we had worked very successfully with the Northern Shield into just a slightly different system. So we have 3 projects right now in Nova Scotia. The Parsborough Group and Five Island Group are really cobalt-rich IOCG projects. We have up to 0.67% cobalt from Five Islands. That came earlier on in the summer, and we will be returning to those projects a little bit later on. The season's a little bit more lengthy there, so we have time to get back there. But the real flagship right now is the Shot Rock property located in north-central Nova Scotia, in between the towns of Antigonish and New Glasgow. Nova Scotia is new to Northern Shield as far as a jurisdiction, but we very much like the area for exploration, and it doesn't just have to do with lobsters. It actually has numerous mineral occurrences on their database, and these are quality known mineral occurrences that have received very little modern and systematic exploration. And some of them have seen absolutely no exploration, and in the case with Shot Rock, it's a brand new story altogether. So Shot Rock was brought to our attention by a very industrious local prospector from Nova Scotia. He was following up on numerous historic HMC, heavy mineral concentrate samples that were highly anomalous in gold and for which the source had never been found. Some of these samples were running 44,000 ppb gold. He followed that up by some panning gold grains from a number of streams in the same area, which sort of confirmed the validity of these historic HMC samples. But early on in the process, he brought to us a boulder of a banded quartz vein. We analyzed that quartz vein and came back with low-grade gold, anomalous but low-grade, but with the pathfinder elements like arsenic, mercury, antimony. And we right away recognized that this was not Manguma Group gold, which Nova Scotia is more famous for, but actually had the classic indications of a low sulphidation epithermal gold system, and that had not been noted in Nova Scotia whatsoever. So I say Northern Shield has a background in magmatic systems, but we certainly wanted to take an opportunity of this target, which was basically, an untouched epithermal gold system in Nova Scotia, and yet this was actually within earshot of the Trans-Canada Highway. So a quick summary, here's an outline of the Shot Rock property. It's 200 square kilometers, so a very large property. It's got the Trans-Canada Highway running right through it. Originally, most of the focus was in this area here. These yellow stars are the historic HMC samples, let's say up to 44,000 ppb. The yellow and orange stars are Northern Shield's or Seabourne samples we collected over the summer, also stream sediment samples. So it was interesting in this area here, surrounding the historic anomalies, we started finding areas of the classic pathfinders for both epithermal systems and Carlin trend. But our real attention was drawn to the highway zone in the central portion of the property. And there we had a very distinct cluster of sediment samples, anomalous in gold, 2 of them up to over 1,000 ppb, and 2 more at over 500 ppb. So once we saw these anomalous sediment samples, we quickly went back in there and started prospecting around, and very quickly we came up with dozens of these boulders along the creek. And again, that banding texture you see is classic characteristics of these low sulphidation epithermal quartz veins. And I say this had never been seen before in Nova Scotia. All of these boulders are anomalous to gold bearing, running anywhere from 25 ppb gold up to 3.3 grams per ton. But even though these grades don't sound particularly exciting at the beginning, it's very important to understand the geometry of epithermal systems and the distinct zonations that you see in them in gold grade. We believe we're fairly high up in the system at Shot Rock. Above a layer you call the boiling cap. And in all these systems, you see very little gold above the boiling cap. You go to these systems in Nevada, you may get a few tens of ppb gold, but as soon as you drop down into that boiling cap and below it, and that's where you're getting these bonanza grades. But the textures of the rocks we see at Shot Rock right now are telling us we're fairly high up in this system. And so to see any gold at all is very, very encouraging. If we're getting up to 3 grams per ton, when we're not supposed to see much gold above the bowling cap, we're pretty excited to see what could be below. And just early this week, we made some fairly significant advancements on the ground. We started finding much larger boulders. Here's a banded quartz boulder over 20 centimeters thick. But more importantly, you see that banding. Every one of those bands represents a pulse of fluid coming up into that fracture zone. Every pulse then has the opportunity of bringing up gold. So this is an indication of a very active system. Again, that large boulder finally led us to some outcrop where we're now finding a 45 centimeter wide vein. We found several of these. These are very large veins considering we're so high up in the system. And again, this photo here, to you, this may look a little bit like a dog's breakfast, but to a geologist, this is a photograph of a spectacularly brecciated, deformed, and reveined quartz vein system. I say there's probably at least 3 phases of veining in this, and that's very important because, again, if you want to form large ore deposits, whether you're talking nickel, whether you're talking epithermal gold, you need to have long-lasting and active systems. And when you see all these episodes of quartz veining and brecciation, that's exactly what we see here. So I'm going to show you on the next slide the sort of spatial distribution of these quartz veins and why we think it's a very large system. But the textures we see here alone are indicating that this is a long-lived and active system. And so to basically form a large deposit, you grow it just like a tree. And so at the top of the tree, you get spindly little branches, you know, where, of course, lower down, you get the thicker branches, and then the trunk. And so if we're seeing very thick quartz veins already on surface, basically at the top of the system, it bodes very well to what we hope to find a little bit lower down. So this is a sort of a summary map, compilation map of what we call the highway zone. In that red area there, that's where we started finding all the pebbles or cobbles in the stream that are anomalous in gold, following up on the stream sediment sample. Since then, we now started finding actual outcrop with stockwork quartz veining running up to a gram per ton. And then just last week, which we've press released 2 days ago, we started finding very intense alteration, stockwork veining, brecciation, and for some very large quartz veins. So right away, if you start looking at the distances between these two outcrops that we have, it's about 350 meters, and that's across strikes, and that's not the length of the zone, that's essentially the width. And now we're starting to find boulders uphill even further away. So that could potentially put, there are only boulders, we haven't found outcrop up there, but obviously boulders don't go uphill, and the ice direction in this area is from north to south. So potentially the width of this is about 850 meters, and that's still open. We have the prospector on the ground right now following up on that, trying to extend it, and Christine will be back there next week again to try to squeeze as much data as we can out of the surface before winter comes. But what we see is a very, very extensive system here, wide, perhaps 850 meters plus, and then we see mineralization for about a 5-kilometer strike length. So spatially, the distribution of these samples are telling us it's a very large system, and all those characteristics I showed you in those photos of the rock are also suggesting this is a very long-lived and active system, and that's what you need for large-scale and rich deposits. As you can also see from this, the yellow line at the bottom is a Trans-Canada Highway, so we actually have gold samples within a few hundred meters of the Trans-Canada Highway. On the north side, we have a railway, and so you have a railway, a road, and power lines all within about 1.5 kilometers of this prospect. So just to summarize, this is another Google map image from the Trans-Canada Highway looking up towards the discovery zone for these gold-bearing quartz veins. So that just exemplifies how close we are to infrastructure. So as Eric said, this is a very early stage story. It's not for everyone, but we have discovered an epithermal gold system, highly prized for the potential of bonanza grades of gold. Spatially, it appears to be very, very extensive, and it has all the ingredients and textures that says this could be part of a giant ore system. So going forward, we'll now be starting to explore, especially over winter, the subsurface, doing some geophysics, and hopefully drilling at depth to see if those grades we see on surface increase dramatically with depth. But as I don't think this is a one-off occurrence either. There is potential for a sort of a camp scale or district scale. We have numerous other sediment samples to follow up on, and we do actually have other rock samples with very similar style mineralization and quartz veining from other portions of the property. So it could be, say, a sort of a mini camp or a mini district scale. But the bottom line is these recent results from last week have really energized Northern Shield and Seabourne, and we now look forward to very rapidly moving this project forward. So thanks very much.